Hey everybody, Leah Klett here with the Christian Post, and my guest today is Joel Smallbone of For King and Country. He both directed and stars in the new movie about his family's life titled Unsung Hero. The soundtrack is great, and it was so fun to
Mm.
watch your family's story on the big screen.
I'm glad, first of all, I'm glad that you appreciated Leah as a woman who has her own family. I'm glad you appreciated the family dynamics. And I'm glad, as someone who you so often, I feel like you're documenting music so much, appreciated the music drops. Because as a musician, naturally, that's a pretty pivotal part of the whole narrative for me. It's like this is hence the title Unsung Hero. This is a very musical story. It starts with music in Australia at a Striper show and an Amy Grant show at the Sydney Opera House. We travel to America. You've got Rebecca, our sister, auditioning, playing different songs. You've got different needle drops. And so I love that you picked up on the music vibes.
Oh, I absolutely loved it. And as I was watching this, I couldn't help but think it must have been really difficult and also really emotional to play your own dad in this movie. What was that experience like, seeing what he went through, some of the despair,
Mm.
some of the stressors, raising so many children, trying to provide, struggling with God's sovereignty?
It's I've dubbed it, you've heard me say it, but I've dubbed it a very expensive therapy session, because you're just going through so much about therapy is going back to the moments that were pinnacle for someone you love or for yourself. And when we first moved to the States, I was very young, as is depicted in the film. And so I only saw it through this kind of adventurer, childlike perspective. But there was something about playing dad, and I was also part of co-writing the script and co-directing it. There's something about diving into his story as an adult now. I'm just a couple years younger than he was when he actually moved. That transformed my whole vantage point of it because I dropped into his life, and so I think it's given me a whole different respect and empathy and love for him, than I'd ever had before. I think often I was very lazy with my stories about my parents and their heritage and what they were going through. Um, and now, after doing a deep dive, I'm much less lazy with it all.
So, how much input did he have in the story and in the script? Because you
Yeah.
are seeing some pretty vulnerable parts of his story. He's not, I mean, you can tell he's such a wonderful person, but he struggles at times.
Yeah. I mean, that was part of you know, I love the Hallmark channel, but you already have the Hallmark channel. And so we weren't setting out to make a Hallmark film. We'd set out to make an adventure drama, you know. And we'd set out to make an honor project for our parents and for parenthood and for motherhood, but we did not set out to make a glory project. It's very different. You can honor someone and still have a holistic understanding who they are. When you make a glory project, you sort of chop off all the edges, the rough, jagged edges of their story. And we didn't feel like that was the right thing to do. And I have to say, Leah, I'm really proud of mom and dad. They certainly had we invited them in every step of the way. They read the scripts, they saw the first edits. They had the ability to speak in the edit if they felt they needed to. And there's obviously a lot of trust that we've all built with each other over the years of working together as a family. But it was very vulnerable. I mean, I think it's the most vulnerable for dad is his character, and he's been very valiant. Very very valiant in knowing that there's a greater good here. Like what I'm so proud of is so many men are seeing themselves in him as a father and a husband, as a careerman, and are just the affinity that they feel is really deep. And I'm afraid if we didn't go sort of as vulnerable with his story and as sort of visceral with his story, I'm afraid that men wouldn't connect with him the way that they should.
Yeah. People look at your family, it's very evident that God has blessed all of you. You and your brother are in a very successful group. Obviously, your sister is a huge star. And you guys are all walking with the Lord, which is alone something that's really incredible. What do you attribute all of this to? What role did your parents play in all of this?
Well, I have to say, first of all, and you've known us for years now, Leah, and we're not a perfect family. Like, there is no perfect family. We are not trying to portray a perfect family in this movie, and we're not trying to sing about it in music. Like, there's a lot, particularly as we've gotten older, there's a lot of space that we've had to use, a lot of things we disagree on almost every level in life, and part of, I think, loving a family is leaving space for everyone's decisions, life decisions, career decisions. Um, and so I'm proud of the space that we leave for each other. I'm proud of the grace that we show for each other. Um, because I think that's a real key part of what Christianity really is there's a grace for differences and for faults and for flaws. Um, I think mom and dad have always. Dad said it actually yesterday. He's like, oh, we had a bit of a agricultural mindset with the family because we were reminiscing about when Rebecca uh, started out as an artist. Our sister Rebecca St. James, Dad needed cheap labor, and so we became the road crew. And so this idea of like, hey, you just get in there, and the same thing with the film, it depicts it, which is like, hey, we got financial issues. We're gonna go and rake leaves and mow lawns and clean houses, and like we're gonna do the thing. And that has just been the mindset ever since. If there's a problem, you get in and you do it. And my hope is that this is a little. Jesus was very focused on the body of Christ and on the family of Christ. And I hope that this is, in a small sort of broken way, our family can be an example of what it looks like to be in a body where you're all moving and shifting and you're showing grace for each other and you're leaving room for each other, but you're loving each other through it. Because I think that's the greatest way to live. And I think it's the most Jesus Galilean way to live.
One thing I also thought was really important, how it shows the importance of community. The church body kind of
Right.
came around you guys and supported and uplifted you when you came from Australia to the United States and were facing financial difficulty. What can Christians, the body of Christ, learn about this coming alongside people who maybe are different from us, who are struggling?
You're right in that if it weren't for a local community, and more specifically, if it weren't for the local church, I don't think we'd still be in America. And I'm 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 really proud to showcase in the movie this part of, again, what I think the body is, in that it's about, in our case, it was people found out we didn't have any furniture and collecting a bunch of furniture. It was that first Christmas, Santa Claus couldn't we couldn't he didn't either know where we live or he couldn't give us gifts. And the local church helped Santa Claus give us more gifts than ever. They rallied around us in very vulnerable. They gave us groceries and we didn't have any food to provide. And to me, that's the great beauty of what local community and even local church is and should be. It's whenever we get outside of that, of like just being hands and feet and just being, you know, um, sort of making ourselves less to raise other people up. Whenever we get outside of that paradigm, I think that's when it starts getting challenging. But I'm so proud that that was our experience over here. And um, I hope that we can now through this movie, and we're going into a load of churches even promoting the movie now, that we can continue to be a part of encouraging those flavors of the local church to continue to come out into their communities, because communities need it more than ever. Families need it more than ever. They need a safe place where they're not going to feel judged. where they can, people can pour into them. So yeah.
Why did you guys keep Smallbone, but your sister didn't? I feel like that's such a throughout the movie we see kind of jokes about your last name, and obviously in the end, Rebecca goes to St. James, but you guys are Smallbone.
Yeah, I mean, look, time will tell whether this was a smart move, or if it sort of overly exposes us, because it's a weird name, right? Smallbone. I mean, and funnily enough, the very reason that Eddie Giordano in the film and in real life was like, hey, you got to change your name, was because he had a peculiar last name, which is DeGamo, very rare, and it was very noticeable. And he sort of regretted, he had a duo, ironically, called DeGamo and Key, and he kind of regretted that his name was plastered on everything. And so, out of protection for Rebecca, he was like, hey, you should have a sort of a stage name to protect your identity. Well, obviously, 30 years later, that's now going to change if this film, as this film gets out to the people. And frankly, with Luke and me, no one really knows this, Leah, because no one's asked it before. But there was a lot of debate about whether we should be Smallbone. We'd thought about carrying the St. James name with us because Rebecca we're such a legacy band of what Rebecca did. We sort of honed our craft under her tutelage as a musician. And Luke and I just came to the place of going, we've already got a moniker, like for King and Country. We're kind of, there's a little bit of safety inside the moniker. So we'll just keep it real and go with our birth last names. But again, now it's sort of like put out there for the world to see.